The WNBA just put an offer on the table that sounds like everything players have been demanding for years. $1 million maximum salaries, minimum contracts worth $250,000, average pay exceeding $500,000. Headlines across sports media are celebrating these unprecedented pay increases as proof the league finally values its players. But buried deep in the fine print of this proposal is something so wild that it's hard to believe it's even real. The league wants to eliminate team-provided housing, a benefit that's been part of the WNBA since 1999 and written into every single collective bargaining agreement for 26 years. Players would suddenly be responsible for finding and paying for their own apartments in some of the most expensive cities in America, navigating lease agreements in markets they barely know, all while dealing with the constant roster instability that defines professional women's basketball. And here's the part that's absolutely blowing players' minds. While salaries are tripling on paper, some players could actually end up losing money when you factor in what they're giving up. The math doesn't work out the way the league wants you to think it does. And once you understand who gets hurt the most by these changes, you'll see why players are ready to walk away from the entire deal. Let's talk about the housing benefit that nobody outside the WNBA seems to understand or care about. Since the league ratified its very first collective bargaining agreement back in 1999, teams have been required to provide housing for their players from the regular season straight through the playoffs. The current system gives players two options: either stay in housing provided directly by the team or receive a monthly stipend to cover their own housing costs. Those stipends vary dramatically depending on which city you're playing in, ranging from a low of $1,177 per month in Las Vegas all the way up to $2,647 in New York, where the cost of living makes rent absolutely brutal. Players with children under 13 who live with them full or part-time are entitled to 2-bedroom units instead of the standard 1-bedroom setup. There's no explicit limit in the collective bargaining agreement for what teams can spend on housing, though there are caps on the stipends for players who choose to opt out of team housing. When you add it all up, this benefit is worth somewhere between $8,000 and $18,000 per season, depending on your market. This system has been a staple of the WNBA for over a quarter century, appearing in every single CBA the league has ever negotiated. Now the league wants to eliminate it entirely, forcing players to navigate the rental market on their own in cities where they might only be spending a few months, with no guarantee they'll even be on the roster long enough to justify signing a lease. Here's why this housing elimination hits certain players way harder than others, and why the league's salary increases aren't as generous as they sound for everyone. Take Breanna Stewart as an example. She's going from making roughly $220,000 in 2025 to potentially earning more than $1 million under this new proposal. Losing $18,000 worth of housing benefits in that scenario represents about 0.02% of her new salary. It's pocket change for a superstar. But now look at a player on the veteran minimum, someone like Kennedy Burke, who made $78,831 in 2025. Under the new proposal, her salary could jump to north of $225,000, which sounds incredible until you realize she's losing roughly $18,000 in housing benefits. That's 8% of her new salary disappearing immediately. Then you've got players on hardship contracts, and this is where the math becomes absolutely insane. WNBA rosters max out at 12 players, and some teams don't even carry that many because of salary cap constraints. When injuries hit, teams are forced to sign players on temporary hardship contracts to meet the league minimum of 10 available players. Those players are often there for a few weeks, maybe a month at most, until the team gets healthy again. Under the current system, they stay in team housing during that brief stint. Under the new proposal, what are they supposed to do? Sign a lease for an apartment they'll occupy for 3 weeks? Pay for hotels out of their own pocket? The league hasn't explained how this is supposed to work, and it gets worse when you consider that only 6 contracts per team are protected, meaning everyone else can be released at any time. An unprotected player signs a contract in free agency, moves to that team's city, gets cut a month later, and suddenly they're stuck with a lease obligation in a market they no longer have any connection to. Most WNBA players live out of suitcases specifically because of this roster instability, and the league wants to make that lifestyle even more complicated. The housing elimination isn't even the most controversial part of this proposal. The league also wants training camps to start in mid-March instead of late April. And when you dig into why that matters, the whole thing starts looking like a deliberate attempt to sabotage players' other opportunities. Moving camps up to March puts them directly in conflict with the NCAA tournament, which creates an absolute nightmare for draft logistics. Historically, training camps begin in late April, after the college season concludes and the WNBA draft happens. This timeline allows rookies to finish their collegiate careers, get drafted, and integrate smoothly into their new teams. A mid-March start throws all of that into chaos. Rookies would be forced to choose between finishing their college careers or reporting to WNBA training camp on time, and teams would suddenly lose any incentive to draft players who can't report immediately. But the conflicts don't stop with college basketball. Unrivaled, the 3-on-3 league founded by Nafisa Collier and Brianna Stewart runs from January through early March. Project B, a new league launching in fall 2026 with serious financial backing and 7-figure contracts for star players, is scheduled to run through April. EuroLeague Women still competes into April as well. The league's prioritization clause, introduced in the last CBA, already requires players to be in their WNBA market by the start of training camp or face suspension. That rule has been particularly tough on international players who want to compete for their national federations. Now the league wants to push that timeline up even further, making it nearly impossible for players to participate in any other league without violating WNBA rules. Seattle Storm star Gabby Williams said it perfectly during All-Star Weekend. It's very clear that the league wants to push away all other leagues. It would make sense if they were paying us more here, but it still isn't the case, even with the new proposals. And it's very clear now that they want to push Unrivaled out, push AU out. Speaking of the pay increases, let's talk about the revenue share math that's making players want to reject this entire proposal despite the impressive-sounding salary numbers. The salary cap is rising from $1.5 million per team to $5 million. Maximum salaries would have a $1 million base, and multiple players per team would be eligible for that supermax. The average salary is projected to exceed $500,000. The minimum salary would be above $225,000. On paper, these are transformational raises that would fundamentally change the financial reality for WNBA players. The problem is, what happens when you calculate what percentage of league revenue these salaries actually represent? Under this proposal, players would receive less than 15% of total league revenue. And here's the kicker. That percentage would actually decrease over the life of the collective bargaining agreement as the league continues to grow. Let that sink in for a second. The league is projecting its own revenue growth, and they've structured the deal so that players get a smaller slice of a bigger pie as time goes on. Meanwhile, NBA players receive between 49% and 51% of basketball-related income. NFL players get 48.8% of revenue. NHL players get 50%. Major professional sports leagues in America split revenue roughly 50-50 with their players. The WNBA wants to give players less than 15% while calling it uncapped revenue sharing. Players aren't stupid. They see through the smoke and mirrors. What makes this proposal feel especially petty is that none of these changes appear to be genuine business necessities. They look like power moves designed to remind players who's really in control. The league is trying to exercise exclusivity over players' time and restrict their ability to earn money elsewhere, rather than growing the game by supporting player opportunities in other leagues. Natasha Cloud of the New York Liberty put it bluntly, "This makes no sense for our younger players, for the players that get cut and are stuck in leases, nor for players in bigger markets. Indiana Fever forward Brianna Turner emphasized that housing should be a priority, not just for maintaining the best on-court product, but also for player safety. One source familiar with the negotiations told Front Office Sports that the March training camp timeline doesn't make logical sense. These changes appear intentionally designed to create problems rather than solve them. Some analysts speculate the league might be using these controversial elements as negotiation tactics, planning to withdraw the most unworkable parts in exchange for concessions on other issues like revenue sharing. But if that's the strategy, it's a risky one that's already backfired spectacularly with players. In December, 98% of participating players voted to authorize their union's executive committee to call a strike when necessary. The participation rate was 93%, meaning nearly the entire league showed up to vote. The executive committee now has the power to call a strike with just 48 hours notice, and the January 9th deadline is approaching fast. When the players and league agreed to their second extension, the WNBPA released a statement saying they expect substantive movement from the league within this window. The union has called the league's approach resistant to change and accused them of recommitting to draconian provisions that have restricted players for nearly 3 decades. Union President Nneka Ogwumike told reporters that negotiations are still a bit in their infancy, which doesn't inspire confidence that a deal is close. The league has repeatedly said they strongly disagree with how players are characterizing negotiations, but they won't open their financial books to show players the actual revenue and profit numbers. The expansion draft for the Toronto Tempo and Portland Fire has already been delayed because the rules depend on what's in the new CBA. The 2026 WNBA draft, scheduled for April, could be canceled. The May season start is officially in jeopardy. The league is dangling massive salary increases in front of players while simultaneously taking away basic support systems that make their lives manageable. The math reveals that some players, particularly those on minimum or temporary contracts, could actually lose money when housing costs are factored in. The housing elimination specifically targets the most vulnerable players who can least afford to absorb those extra expenses. The March training camp conflicts expose what the league's real priorities are, and it's not about growing the game or supporting players, it's about control and exclusivity. The revenue share is still a tiny fraction of what players receive in other major professional sports leagues, and it's structured to shrink over time as the league grows. Players are united, they've authorized a strike, and they're refusing to accept salary increases that come packaged with conditions that make their lives demonstrably worse. The question everyone should be asking is whether the WNBA is actively sabotaging its own momentum at the exact moment when the league has reached peak popularity. This is the worst possible time for a labor fight, but players have made it clear they'd rather risk everything than accept a deal that disrespects them this blatantly. January 9th will reveal whether the league is serious about building a true partnership with players, or if this has always been about maintaining power and control regardless of the consequences.